Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. The long-awaited report from the Justice Department's watchdog was released Thursday and concludes that former FBI Director James Comey deviated from Bureau and Justice Department procedures in his handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Inspector General Michael Horowitz going so far as to call Comey insubordinate for concealing from his superiors his plans to make a public statement in July 2016 when he ultimately exonerated Clinton. Horowitz found, however, that Comey was not motivated by political bias. The report also found that Comey made a serious error of judgment in sending a letter to Congress in October of 2016 announcing he was reopening the investigation. Let's bring in Wall Street Journal columnist and deputy editor Dan Henninger and columnist Kim Strassel and Bill McGurn. So, Kim, what's the single biggest takeaway we should have out of this IG report?
Single biggest takeaway is that the leadership under Jim Comey was disgraced by this report. He said that Jim Comey was insubordinate, as we noted. Not only did he decide to cut out the Department of Justice, go around the chain of command, he concealed that from the people that were his bosses, and against better advice, went out, did this press conference exonerating Hillary Clinton, but then also chastised her for things that she was not even charged for, which is something that the Department of Justice does not do. A lot of this was put in Rod Rosenstein's memo for why Donald Trump fired him, and we now know that he was correct to have done that firing. Okay, let's dig into the substance here of Comey. Pretty really rough criticism. But Comey, of course, defended himself in his memoir in particular. Why would he do this if it was so against Justice Department rules?
Well, I think he thought he was, I wouldn't say above the law, that he was the law. If you look at the report, to me, the most damning thing was ad hoc decision-making based on personal views.
So it's not political bias, but it's about him?
About his own reputation. I think the Bureau's reputation suffered because he put his own personal reputation first and sent awfully bad signals. Look, the reason the Justice Department and the FBI have procedures is to guarantee fairness, and not just fairness, but also the appearance of fairness, so people can have confidence in their institutions. The irony is, by putting his ego first, and people that have written about Jim Comey for 20 years have never really accused him of being political. They've accused
political in the sense of being partisan.
A partisan. They've always accused him of putting his own grandstanding above everyone else. And the Bureau suffered terribly for it. And the deceit is a big part. The way he dealt with Loretta Lynch and the people at the Justice Department in these announcements, kind of, informing them after he's informed the press that he's going to have this press conference. It's just outrageous, and there's no defense. The FBI's letter at the end of the report, they don't defend Mr. Comey on it.
And Dan, the tragic irony here is that Comey claims to have done this to protect the reputation of the FBI, but by breaking the rules in the end, he undermined the FBI probably to a greater degree than we can recall since J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, that's right, Paul. I mean, I think he's done significant damage to the reputation of the FBI. Clearly, he was at the least incompetent to be the director of the FBI. What he thought he was doing was manifest in the title of the book he wrote, To a Higher Authority. And that's what he always thought he was doing. But there were higher authorities than James Comey at the Department of Justice. And we should say, what were they thinking? Loretta Lynch presumably felt that she did not recuse herself, but take herself back because of her meeting with Bill Clinton on that tarmac. But there was no reason why Loretta, and this is made clear in the IG's report, they wonder, why did not Attorney General Lynch or Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates step in and try to take more control over what Comey was doing? He was left to run on his own with no accountability to anyone.
Kim, what about this question of political bias? I don't want to get into some of the emails by other members of the FBI right now, but I want to ask you about Comey himself and the decisions that were made about the Clinton investigation. The IG said they weren't. He didn't see political bias, but he did really raise a lot of questions about breaking normal practices.
Well, actually, what he said, and I think this is a very important distinction, is he said that they did not find any demonstrable factual evidence that bias made an impact on specific decisions having to do with the investigation. So that's essentially saying we didn't catch anyone who write a letter saying we should start this or let Clinton off the hook so that she can be president.
Right.
They didn't find any evidence of that. But he did say that, in fact, there was a great deal of bias, which he found, and that cast a cloud over the entire credibility of the investigation. And I think if you look at some of the decisions that were made in terms of immunity deals, in terms of their agreeing to Clinton lawyer demands on what they could search for in laptops, the kid glove treatment overall, what he was essentially saying is, I think you cannot stop yourself from asking whether or not bias did influence the way that they dealt with this investigation.
A lot of questionable decisions, waiting a month before they investigated Anthony Weiner's laptop in October.
And Mr. Comey's explanation for that is he didn't know Huma Abedin and Anthony Weiner were married. I mean, it's an extraordinary kind of, imagine if General Flynn gave that kind of defense when asked about something. It's incredible. Further to Kim's point, as Ed Whalen, former Justice Department guy, said, no evidence of bias affecting decisions does not mean that there was evidence of no bias. In fact, the IG pointed out that Peter Strzok's decision to prioritize the Russian investigation over following up on the emails, they didn't have confidence that it was free of bias.
And we're going to get a lot more on Strzok after we come back, much more on the IG report as well, including new scrutiny of texts exchanged between two FBI employees and whether political bias did play a role in the Clinton and Russia probes. The Inspector General's report shining a new light on texts between FBI agent Peter Strzok and his girlfriend, FBI lawyer Lisa Page. In an exchange included in the report, Page asked Strzok, quote, "Trump's not ever going to become president, right? Right?" Strzok responds, no, he won't. We'll stop it. While the Inspector General said he did not find documentary evidence that political bias affected any decision-making, he concluded that because of his views, Strzok may have improperly prioritized the Russia investigation over the Clinton probe during the final weeks of the campaign. We're back with Dan Henninger, Kim Strassel, and Bill McGurn. So, Dan, it's an extraordinary email. What was going through Peter Strzok's mind? He's a law enforcement officer who's supposed to be disinterested.
Right. And he was not disinterested, and that's the problem. Not only Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, but they identify at least two other FBI agents, FBI agent 1 and 5, and FBI attorney number 2, who were exchanging similar sorts of highly political emails or text. And what happened here is that these agents, these people of the FBI, went into a simple panic, a political panic at the idea that both Donald Trump could become president. They were doing this before the election, and then indeed after the election. They completely lost professional discipline. And there seemed to have been no one around them to impose that discipline at all. And the question is whether that informed some of their decisions. I think the Inspector General Horowitz gave them a break by saying it did not inform their decisions. It really challenges credibility that you could be exchanging texts like that and not have that affect your professional decision making.
Bill, one other extraordinary fact, maybe you can shed some light. The second part of that Strzok exchange with Page, Congress had asked for that, and that was left out of what was provided to
the
Congress.
Lisa Page part they got from Ron Johnson.
But we'll stop it did not.
The question is whether it was a glitch or whether it was deliberately excluded. And the problem is we don't know, but I don't think that the FBI and the Department of Justice have earned the benefit of the doubt given their redactions of all these documents. Look, further to Dan's point, the one thing that the Inspector General could not find in his 568 pages is any pro-Trump text by anyone there. Look, FBI agents have a right to their opinions, but this was on FBI devices. These were people at the top running these two investigations into basically the campaign of the person, the two leading candidates. They have to look fair in addition to being fair. And maybe one of the comparisons is not just was this decision reasonable in the Hillary investigation, but compare the the Hillary investigation. Let's cooperate with the witnesses. Let's let Cheryl Mills act as counsel and sit in on with the way the FBI investigated Donald Trump, which was FISA warrants, and we'll plant an informant there. Trey Gowdy suggests that's a big problem.
But Kim, let's take the response. Peter Strzok said, look, they said there was no, his lawyer said there was no political bias, so really no problem. These were just private views, and it didn't affect the investigations. So what's your response to that?
Well, my response is the text that you just named will stop it. And the Inspector General went out of his way to say, look, why this particular text is very problematic is because it goes beyond having a political view and suggests that you will take action using the powers that you have under your control at the FBI.
But Kim, if there were no
to change a political outcome.
But if there were no action taken, then what's the problem?
Well, how do we know that? I mean, how do we know? The problem is once you have said that, once you say we'll stop it, now you have to look at every single action that Peter Strzok took. And do not forget, I mean, this is very important. He was the lead investigator on the Russia probe. He was the guy who flew to London to debrief this Australian diplomat who first supposedly tipped them off about the Russia collusion, if there was any. He was the guy calling the shots. When you've got a guy on record saying, we're going to stop this, I think the implication is that every single action he might have took was taken to stop Donald Trump from being president rather than because he believed that there was an honest issue or problem here. All
right, Dan, what do you think this all does to the Mueller probe? Obviously, Mueller was named after this in after the campaign. But at the very least, it will seem to complicate how he's going to proceed going forward, or the reception what he produces will get.
That's right. I mean, let's recall that Mueller was appointed after Donald Trump fired James Comey. The idea was that perhaps Trump was doing it to obstruct the investigation into the so-called Russian collusion story. This IG report makes it clear, as did Rod Rosenstein's memo, that Trump was absolutely justified, unquestionably justified, in firing Jim Comey. So that predicate for the Mueller investigation is now very weak. And the question is, what is he left with other than these sort of peripheral investigations that he's been going with some of the people at the edge of the Trump campaign? So I think the Mueller investigation is really on pretty weak ground right now, Paul.
Okay, thank you, Dan, Kim, Bill. When we come back, breaking down the Trump-Kim summit, was this week's historic meeting merely a photo op or the beginning of something more?
We signed an incredible agreement. It's great. And it's going to be great for them, too.
Chairman Kim and I just signed a joint statement in which he reaffirmed his unwavering commitment to complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We also agreed to vigorous negotiations to implement the agreement as soon as possible. And he wants to do that. This isn't the past. This isn't another administration that never got it started and therefore never got it done.
That was President Trump in Singapore Tuesday following his summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The historic one-day meeting capped off with the signing of a statement the president called comprehensive, but critics call vague. So was the summit just a photo op or something more? We're back with Dan Henninger, Bill McGurn, and Wall Street Journal editorial board member Mary Kissel. So, Bill, summit, big PR success for sure. President dominated the world stage. But what about substance? How successful?
Well, we don't know. We know that President Kim, in theory, has agreed to complete denuclearization. Look, this is where I depart from Ronald Reagan. I was never a trust and verify guy. I'm a distrust and verify guy. And so I think there should be a lot of skepticism. That said, for all the criticism, everything Donald Trump does comes with a lot of noise. It's like the circus coming into town. And I think we have to me, the test is whether any of these things are worth it, is whether we get what the agreement says, complete and verifiable denuclearization. And we won't know that for a while.
But in that sense, Mary, we're betting on Donald Trump being right as he assesses the intentions of Kim Jong-un.
Yes, that's right. And just a correction here to Bill, it didn't say complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. The communique, it just said complete. And Mike Pompeo says, yeah, all those other things are in there. Trust us. Look, I think it's positive that the president is keeping maximum pressure sanctions on. The thing that really worried me, Paul, was the president's remark that he wants to stop wargaming with South Korea. He called the exercises very provocative, but they are really anything but. They serve to deter North Korea. They keep our troops ready. And it's really a unilateral concession on the president's part to suspend those games. I think there's a lot of concern amongst our allies.
So Mike Pence told the Senate Republicans that they were only suspending 2 exercises, the big one in the spring and another one in August, which they now have suspended. He had to walk that back a bit afterwards, and it's not clear yet, is there, or can you clarify for us whether or not more extensive, even routine investigations and training will be suspended?
Well, routine training is going to continue, but the Pentagon isn't returning our phone calls asking about the big exercises. And look, Paul, these aren't one-off exercises that you can just cancel. They are meant to keep our troop readiness up, and they are timed to coincide with the North Korean exercises. You have troops coming in from the United States. You have allies coming in. They're meant to familiarize this joint coalition with the terrain of the Korean Peninsula. You know, you can't just say, well, let's just cancel them. You know, we can always restart them. There are real costs to doing that.
But Dan, here's the argument you hear from some of the people in the administration. Look, nothing else has worked. Give the presidents a chance. The sanctions are still on. Give them some running room. They can always be the military exercises can be restarted. The sanctions can be toughened up. So let's just see if this can happen.
Yeah, let us indeed do that, Paul. But let us not delude ourselves that this is materially different from what previous presidents have done, all right? What he has done is meet personally with the leader of North Korea. Any other president could have done that with Kim's father. But where we are is the same point they were, is in the foothills of negotiations with no commitment, as there was not in previous negotiations, from the North Koreans to do anything concrete or material to wind down their nuclear capability. And so, we're hopeful. And at the moment, they are not testing missiles. They're not testing more bombs. That will hold for a while, presumably. But make no mistake, Kim Jong-un's scientists will be working in their labs to try to perfect the weaponization of a ballistic missile while these negotiations go on. And what we're looking for is some material commitment from the North Korean side, such as inspectors inside that country soon. But we have not seen that yet.
Well, here's a thought. If the president cares about provocations, what about having the North Koreans pull their troops back 50 kilometers from the demilitarized zone? That is a show of goodwill. What about a statement acknowledging South Korea as a separate country? What about an accounting of the WMD program? What about lists of countries that they supply goods to and trade with? I mean, any number of things where they could demonstrate some goodwill.
I'd push back on that. One thing, look, there are a million caveats you can have. You can't expect the leader of a country to come to a meeting to be publicly humiliated before the world. Probably he came because he worries that if he doesn't cooperate, there's a plan B military force. Look, the effort up to this meeting was the president got our hostages out. He put in very tough sanctions that other people haven't. Again, you can have a lot of questions about the details. And if President Trump fails, it'll be, number one, very harmful to American security and a massive humiliation for him. He staked his credibility on this.
But how different is it really, other than the photo op?
Well, we won't know.
But wait a minute, what Bush and
well, first of all, I think it was a lot tougher going into it, right? I mean, Bill Clinton stood at the thing and said,
I don't know about that.
Did anyone get American hostages out of North Korea? Did we have the sanctions?
Well, we've had many hostages, and we had Banco Delta Asia under the George W. Bush administration.
Not as tough as I think that the policy preceding this was a lot tougher than we've had before. And again, the test for me is Will it be worth it? It'll be worth it if we do get it denuked. It won't be worth it. It'll be a humiliation if we don't. It seems to be very simple.
Last word, Mary?
Yeah, the proof's in the pudding. I think Mike Pompeo is a big road ahead, and I don't think it's helpful to make unilateral concessions talking about wargaming.
Okay, thank you all. Still ahead, the Trump administration insisting that sanctions will remain in place on North Korea until denuclearization is complete. So what do we know about Pyongyang's nuclear arsenal, and how will we know when that's achieved? We'll ask a former weapons inspector next.
Fox Report with John Scott.
This just in. Great story here. Busy week at the White House. There were lots of warning signs. More on all of this now. The stock market back up. America is back.
Don't miss Fox Report Saturday.
We believe that Chairman Kim Jong-un understands the urgency of the timing of completing this denuclearization, that he understands that we must do this quickly, and that sanctions relief, we should recall these are UN sanctions, that sanctions relief cannot take place until such time as we have demonstrated that North Korea has been completely denuclearized.
That was Mike Pompeo in Seoul this week, insisting sanctions relief will not come to North Korea until it completely denuclearizes, a process the Secretary of State says could take as long as 2.5 years. Pyongyang staged the destruction of one of its test sites last month, but dismantling its entire nuclear program is another matter. So how can the U.S. verify what North Korea actually has in its arsenal? Let's ask David Albright. He's the founder and president of the Institute for Science and International Security and a former weapons inspector. Mr. Albright, thanks for being here.
Oh, good to be here.
So let's start out by giving us the lay of the land. How many weapons, nuclear weapons, do we think North Korea really has?
Well, it's a very difficult estimate to make because we know just not that much. I mean, estimates I've made, it's anywhere from 15 to 35 nuclear weapons. Number could actually be higher if they have more capability than we're estimating. So it's very tough. But they have a couple dozen nuclear weapons. Maybe there's a chance it's fewer. But again, it's uncertain, and the problem is that it's very hard to know where countries make nuclear weapons and where they store them. So what we fall back to typically is trying to look at their capabilities to make plutonium and weapon-grade uranium, and those facilities tend to be easier to understand and to inspect.
All right, and how many of those facilities do we know that they have? Because I know that for a while we knew they had a plutonium site, but we didn't know about their enriched uranium site.
That's right. The plutonium program is much better understood. It was a focus of the six-party talks in the 2000s, and so
right.
and earlier, and so lots known about that. And we don't think they have a secret reactor, but they do have a secret enrichment plant. We're pretty sure, and we don't know where. Well, Western intelligence has a pretty good idea of where that plant is. They also have another one at Yongbyon, which they built in secret and revealed in 2010. So I think the working assumption is they have two substantial uranium enrichment plants. One North Korea admits to, one it doesn't, and those plants are going to have to be thoroughly inspected. But before that, I mean, what you want in verification is for the country to reveal in an honest way what its nuclear capabilities are, and in this case including its nuclear weapons production capabilities and the size of its nuclear arsenal.
Right, so that means that at a first step, what you want from North Korea is essentially a declaration, a list. Here's what we have in terms of our weapons, in terms of our sites for building those weapons, in terms of our sites for enriching uranium and plutonium, and so on and so on and so on.
And you would like that the initial list could be almost just like a list, but you would like them to allow visits to those sites so that inspectors can, in a sense, get the lay of the land. And these inspectors probably should not be the International Atomic Energy Agency. I mean, it probably should be an effort organized by the United States and its allies in that region, including China. Well, let me not call them an ally, but at least a friend, right, on this issue. And then North Korea needs to create a narrative of its nuclear weapons program, and that would become a full-blown declaration, which could then be verified by the inspectors.
Okay, so, and when you talk about inspectors, you said that it should be an international group, not the UN, and the U.S. should be part of that. But does it have to be inspections that are essentially on demand? That means anywhere we want to look, we can go, and you'll help us look and see what you've got.
They don't have to be that intrusive. I mean, but North Korea's got to be willing to allow, well, to tell an honest story. I mean, in a sense, you know when you see it. Then there's going to be some places, I mean, we have them, lists of sites that are suspect nuclear sites. I mean, they're going to have to allow some level of visits to places where we just want to check it out. You know, is it, were we wrong? Were we right? You know, is it fallen off the list because it's closed down? I mean, but so there's going to have to be fairly broad access, but it doesn't have to be like in the case of Iraq where the inspectors had the absolute right to go anywhere. I mean, it can be less than that, and it can work quite well.
But why less than that? If we know from the past that North Korea has not told the truth, why shouldn't it be just as intrusive? Because Saddam had lied for years as well, and that's why it was as intrusive.
Well, what I'm saying is it would be great if it could be that intrusive. North Korea hasn't allowed inspectors to go outside of Yongbyon to this day, except maybe one or two cases where U.S. had a special mission to do and paid quite a price to get there. So I think what you want to do is design a system where it's good enough, but you don't want to demand perfect.
Okay. Do we have to insist that they stop enriching uranium and that we basically be able to haul out all of the stockpiles of enriched uranium they have and plutonium and haul it out of the country?
They certainly have to stop. I mean, that's going to be an issue. I mean, North Korea is going to say, yeah, but we have some needs, civil reactors, we want to fuel. I think the United States has to be very firm. No enrichment at all. It's just a bad idea, given the history of the whole effort with North Korea. They should be shutting down and dismantling their uranium enrichment program, along with their plutonium program and their nuclear weapons program, and that's absolutely necessary. It's not about freezing, it's really about getting rid of in a verifiable manner, and so it's critical to do that.
And I would assume that would include the plutonium as well.
No, for sure. They may keep a reactor operational, that if it's making electricity, they may even import reactors, but they wouldn't be enriching uranium for those reactors. Those reactors would be structured or designed in a way that they're what we call very proliferation resistant. But that part of the peaceful nuclear energy program of North Korea has to be negotiated carefully, and really I don't think we're even at that stage yet.
Right. It's fascinating. Thanks for the insight, Mr. Albright. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Still ahead, the Trump administration slapping steep tariffs on imports from China. What the move means for the world's two largest economies and Beijing's cooperation with North Korea. The Trump administration announced Friday that it will impose a 25% tariff on up to $50 billion of Chinese goods, a decision that brought swift retaliation from Beijing and dramatically escalated trade tensions between the world's two largest economies. The penalties aimed at punishing China for stealing American technology and trade secrets. The tariffs will apply.
Look, European allies, Asian allies, they think they have the same problem with China as well. So let's get them on board with us and let's act together against China. Let's not go it alone.
Alicia, you've been looking at the list of products that are targeted by the Trump administration, and now China targeting American products. Who's going to be hurt here?
I think manufacturers, including some aluminum and steel makers.
American manufacturers?
Right. Most of their components, they're used in machines, boring machines, drilling machines. Some in construction will be heard. That'll increase the cost for a lot of infrastructure projects. One of the goals of the corporate tax reform was really to increase investment in capital expenditures. And that's really going to take a hit.
So this is from the tariffs that we are imposing on China. Now, what about the tariffs that China is imposing on American goods? Who are they targeting there?
Well, I think mainly the Farm Belt. You see a lot of soy, pork, and to an extent airplanes. But these are Trump. That's Trump country.
Could be Boeing.
Possibly Boeing. Yes.
Okay, so they are going to. So that's Trump country. You think they're deliberately targeting Trump states?
Well, of course, because these are they're trying to maximize political pressure, and so you're going to have Iowa farmers hit, and this could actually if this escalates into a trade war, this could ripple into a recession in the Farm Belt.
Because the Farm Belt is actually one of the weaker parts.
Right,
the
income
economy
has actually been declining for the past couple of years.
Well, Dan, I don't know if you saw, but Gary Cohn, the president's former national economic advisor, said that this could begin to undermine if this gets out of control, this trade tit for tat, and now the president's fighting with Europe on steel and aluminum, Mexico, Canada, Japan, now China. This could escalate in a way that really does put a big dent in the economy. You agree with that?
I agree to the extent that, yes, it could. We're not there yet, but we need some results if we're going to avoid that result, and we just have not seen them yet. But it's very complicated. I mean, the Trump administration is kind of playing three-dimensional chess here. We've slapped $50 billion of tariffs on China, who we want to help us negotiate denuclearization with North Korea, all right? And as Mary suggested, we should have our allies along if we're going to rightfully target China's trade practices. However, we have also targeted all those allies, Britain, Europe, Japan, South Korea, with tariffs of their own. So this is a very complicated process, and I assume the White House has a plan, but if it doesn't pan out, Gary Cohn's right. We're going to start seeing a negative impact on the American economy eventually.
Well, that plan I don't see, frankly. I don't see. I think this looks to me to be ad hoc. But here's another thing that I don't quite understand is the sanctions that Trump lifted against ZTE. That's a Chinese telecom company that buys products from America's Qualcomm and had the death sentence because it had twice, not once, twice, violated U.S. sanctions against exports of technology to Iran and North Korea. Yet he gave them a reprieve, even now as he turns around and slaps tariffs on China for other goods. What's the common thread or plan, if I may, here?
Yeah, Dan said three-dimensional chess. I'm not seeing three-dimensional chess here, Paul. This looks like a game of checkers on a playground. Look, there is no plan here. I think the president is an emotional person. I think he acted because President Xi Jinping asked him to save ZTE, and now he's got Congress against him, and rightfully so, because by helping ZTE that was rightfully sanctioned, you're undermining the sanctions regime. And you're saying to other violators, well, you know what? If your head of state calls up the president and says nice things, maybe you'll get a reprieve too.
Briefly, Alicia, you've been reporting on Capitol Hill. Are they going to overrule the president on ZTE?
I think the Senate is, and the White House is going to have to try to work out this amendment in the defense reauthorization to try to get it out of the House. But
so what would be in the House version?
Right, but there's widespread opposition to letting ZTE off the hook.
Okay, he may have to veto if he wants it out. When we come back, a federal judge greenlights AT&T's acquisition of Time Warner in a deal that could transform the American media landscape. In a big defeat for the Trump Justice Department, AT&T announced Thursday that it had completed its acquisition of Time Warner after a federal judge earlier this week ruled that the deal could go through without any conditions. The Justice Department sued to block the $85 billion merger last November, arguing that it would hinder competition and raise prices for consumers. We're back with Dan Henninger, Kim Strassel, and Alicia Finley. So, Alicia, you've been covering this for us. Good decision by Judge Dick Leon?
Right. I think it was right on all the merits and really sent a message to the Justice Department. The last time a vertical merger was even challenged by the Justice Department was in 1977, and it lost. Here it was even more dubious because in the media and broadband markets, there's becoming more competition and more convergence. Google and Facebook now have more advertising revenues than all TV combined.
So when you talk about a vertical merger, what you mean is companies that don't directly compete with one another.
Right, like distributors and content producers.
Now, that's what this combines.
Right.
And the government argued that this would raise prices because AT&T would deny Time Warner content to other people. Judge Leon said no. There's no evidence.
There's no evidence, right? They relied on this one University of California, Berkeley professor, but all the other economists that were brought in as witnesses really disputed his assertions and his assumptions, and even the judge really picked apart in his 172-page ruling these arguments.
So Kim, help me out on the politics here. If the law and the marketplace was so clear to the judge, why would the Justice Department lead with its chin in such a high-profile case?
Well, it might have something to do with the fact that the guy at the top, Donald Trump, opposed this merger, not necessarily on any strong legal grounds, but because he didn't like CNN much, which happens to be one of the entities at question here. And so, you know, we have Makan Delrahim, who is his antitrust chief. They decided to go out and try this. Didn't work on the merits, and it shouldn't have. And you know, we'll see what they decide to do next. They said they're considering next steps, but this is one where they ought to just let it go because it's right on policy and right on the merits.
Dan, you and I have covered antitrust for many years, and you know, there's always some antitrust lawyers in the Justice Department who look for any case to try to stop just because they can flex their muscles and show that they're still relevant, even if they end up losing. But is this going to now, with this defeat, unleash a lot of mergers in the media business? You know, there's a bidding war for the assets of Fox now, which of course owns this network, and some of those assets between Disney and Comcast. Are we going to see all kinds of mergers?
Oh, unquestionably, we're going to see mergers. I mean, the amount of economic activity that's going to take place in the media business is going to be extraordinary. And, you know, in many ways, at the end of the day, it's what does all this mean for consumers, customers of this video content? And we're in a way like at the same point we were at the dawn of Hollywood or the golden age of television, all of which were predicated on the fact that there are massive numbers of people who want to absorb entertainment through a screen. That means a lot of money. And these people are now, as a result of this economic activity, going to be afforded all sorts of ways to get that material, and probably at a pretty good price. I don't think most consumers could care less whether the platform is AT&T or Netflix or Amazon Prime. They just want good product, and I think that's what's going to result from this process.
You know, one of the interesting things here, Alicia, well, you're going to see Amazon, you're going to see Google, YouTube already in the entertainment media business. You're going to see Facebook investing in content. You're going to see all kinds of companies. Comcast is bidding for more. What does this suggest, though, to you about the future of antitrust against these big tech giants? Are we going to see maybe the Justice Department and FTC, Federal Trade Commission, turn to them and say, you know what, you control so much market share in search and social, now we're going to target you?
Well, right. And when you have Facebook and Google controlling about 70% of all digital ad revenues, that really raises, and they use their clout to kind of block competitors, whether it be Yelp, whether it be the Wall Street Journal editorials. And I think you are going to see a bigger push, and especially from Capitol Hill, to put pressure on these companies. And you're already seeing some calling for them to break up.
Going to be fascinating to watch. We have to take one more break. When we come back, hits and misses of the week.